Good morning. Good morning. My beloved community, right here and beyond, wherever you're listening from. Let me begin by sharing with you why I'm here. At the church's board meeting 8 days ago, we started with our tradition of checking in. When my turn came, I talked about the situation, things. I am never good with minds. When my turn came, I talked about the situation in Gaza and began to cry. The response from our ministers and the board members were wonderful, filled with care and love. And that's one of the many reasons that all of you are so special, this community. I just want to say that I might need to stop. I've been crying all week. And in spite of the beautiful day out there, my mind is transfixed and my emotions elsewhere. One question I asked the Reverend Blake this week: did Dr. Thurman ever speak on the issue of the conflict between the Palestinians and Israelis? The truth is, I don't know, and I couldn't find anything, and I searched and searched. I've been constantly thinking about the women and the men I believe who were our 20th century prophets and what they would think if they were here today. I want to read a few names of children killed, and please forgive my mispronunciation, particularly of the Arabic names. I strive to find more names of Israeli children who were killed and found one. My source for the names, except for a U.S. child and the Israeli child, is a Guardian article on the 23rd of October. All other Palestinian children died in Israeli air and missile strikes starting on October 7th. So I'm going to read some names. Mohammed al-Garabli, age 2. Luna Hassan Abu Nada, age 5. Alma al-Majada, age 3. Muhammad al-Qayyad, 2 months. The Al-Azaya family, of which 26 members were killed and 12 under the age of 12 years old. Omar Shanakala, age 2 months. Al-Zayan family children: Amir, 4, Khalid, 7, Obeda, 9, Hassan, 12, Momin, 12, Noor, 9, Zaina, 7, Maya, 5, Hala, 1, Salma, 5, Balsam, 3. Also, a young man, Wadia Alfa-Yomei, age 6, was killed in Plainfield Township, Illinois. He was fatally stabbed by his landlord in what is considered a hate crime. The Israeli name, the only one I could find, was Carmel Bakar. I really don't know his age, but I know he was a child from the references. He was killed by Hamas at Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th. So what I want to do now is take a moment of silence and prayer for the many who have died, wounded, or are buried under the rubble. 14, after the 1967 war, I remember countless arguments at family gatherings between my grandparents, who were anti-Zionist, and my parents, aunts, and uncles, who were pro-Israel. The family conflict, which sometimes devolved into yelling at each other, scared me. It really traumatized me. In particular, I listened carefully to what my grandparents said, as I felt they were the underdogs and were overwhelmed by insults and being called anti-Semites by their children. The next year, my parents and I went to Israel. Being a Southern teenager of the Jewish faith, whose eyes were beginning to open by the racism in my midst, this trip opened them further. My heart ached by what I learned and saw in Israel and the occupied territories. Etched in my memory to this day, I remember the tour buses that drove through Gaza and the West Bank. Inside those buses included Israeli soldiers with machine guns. And I remember looking in the faces of the people. Those faces of men, women, and the children looked sad, frightened, and defeated. It was painful to see. Compared to Israel, which at that time was not as wealthy, this poverty was jarring. The condescending comments made by adults and youth on those buses lacked concern or compassion. Additionally, while I observed many positive things, I observed how Israelis of European descent treated the Arabs. In fact, I didn't even know the word Palestinian at the time. And how Jews from the Arab world and Africa, the Sephardim or Mizrahi, were treated. This took me back to my hometown, where whites treated blacks the same way. I met with Israeli youth, visited a kibbutz, and was very quiet, just observing and watching. Inside, I felt a great confusion, sadness, and adrift, and I just wanted to go home where I could feel safe. When asked how I felt about what I was seeing, I was quiet and uttered some platitudes, such as, "It's interesting where it's nice." Yes, I was hiding within the conflicts and turmoil. Back home, my parents repeatedly asked me, "How did you feel about this trip? Tell us." Finally, feeling very nervous in reply and paraphrasing here my response, it looked to me that the Israelis treated Arabs and non-white Jews like Southern whites treat blacks. My parents were absolutely furious at me, called me an ingrate for having financed me going on this trip, and we argued over and over. Finally, they demanded and arranged that I go to talk to the rabbi of the local synagogue. Ironically, my parents were secular and my father was an atheist. So I thought, why are they turning to the rabbi? So I went. And after listening to my recounting of the trip, he said, "I don't think you hate Israel. I just believe you hate that you're Jewish." What can a 15-year-old depressed boy say in response? I was silent, just dying to leave. Today, I would say it was like, "Beat me up, Scotty." Over the next number of months, I withdrew further and further from my family, the Jewish community, including a youth group, and from any desire to identify as Jewish. I felt so much and understood so little at that time. I only wanted to escape and forget. As an adult, I preferred to believe for many years that I came to terms with my childhood and Jewishness by avoidance. I was relieved by my ability to compartmentalize. However, through many, many years of therapy, listening and learning, dialogues with Jews, Palestinians, Christians, folks of other faith and no faith, by joining political groups organized around Palestine and Israel, and becoming engaged in two faith communities, one the Religious Society of Friends, and the other this beloved community, I have found my voice and have begun to heal. It has grown stronger without the fears I once had. This journey of 55 plus years, my internal struggles, and intergenerational trauma passed on my family weren't easy, nor are they to this day. The current genocide in Gaza opens a wound in me again. And other times of the 56-year occupation and conflicts have forced me to revisit those wounds. Clearly, learning about the history of Palestine from the 19th century, the advent of Zionism, the British colonization that led to the Balfour Declaration and the promise to the Jews of a homeland in Palestine by a European colonial power, a common refrain that hasn't died yet: the Jews, people without a land; Palestine, a land without people. The Nakba, or catastrophe of 1948, when over 700,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes. And since 1967, the world's longest occupation perpetuated on a civilian population by a state that claims to represent the people, represent the Jewish people, my faith of origin, has made me an anti-Zionist. There is nothing else I can be. Why? The huge gap in power and inequality between the Israeli state and stateless Palestinians of Gaza and the West Bank has deeply impacted my beliefs. Yes, the Jewish people have a terrible history, and anti-Jewish Semitism is alive and well to these days. Jews, including my own family, never felt safe and believed the homeland would make them safe and give them a place to go. As a young child, and later to justify Israel's existence, I remember being told that we might need to leave suddenly. That was very hard to hear, being told that as a young boy. I remember being told, my view is that the unbridled power of the Israeli state, the militarism, the daily misery and humiliation of the Palestinians has, I believe, made Jews, let me say us Jews, less safe. So let me reflect on October 7th and what happened for a moment. The issue of Palestinian determination and conditions in the occupied territories in the last 10 years has disappeared from the world's radar. The status quo has become acceptable. And yes, not only by Israel, but the US, Europe, and many of the Arab states as well. The Abraham Accords of 2020, orchestrated by the US between Israel, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates, then later Morocco and Sudan, as well as the latest UN-led negotiations towards the establishment of diplomatic relations between the Saudis and the Israelis, have left the Palestinians in a quandary. Why is that? They live in an open-air prison, a walled-off Gaza with nowhere to go, along with what I consider the Bantustans of the West Bank, where the West Bank is populated by settlements of Israelis. There is no possibility at this time for a more just future. Negotiations ended nonviolent acts of resistance by the Palestinians, and the nonviolent Great March of Return of 2018 to the wall in Gaza resulted in the injury and murder of countless Palestinians by Israeli snipers. If I were a Palestinian in Gaza, not a resident of the global north, in great comfort, I would ask, where is my nonviolence gone? What would I do? I believe the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel was a cry for attention to the world that had forgotten it. I remember my parents and my grandparents telling me stories during the Second World War, and actually prior to the Second World War, how the United States and Europe had forgotten the Jews in their midst. The Palestinians have become the disinherited from their land. It was their cries of pain, of their suffering, and loss of hope. The resulting loss of life for Israelis, the loss of life for the Palestinians, and the destruction of Gaza to this moment is a tragedy and stain on the world's inaction, particularly of the most powerful, starting with the U.S. I suggest we never ignore the historical context of the situation. As well, the mainstream media, where many get their news, is often devoid of context and promotes what I believe disinformation and perpetuates a historical culture in this country. All of us in this room and those listening in this nation are watching as the U.S. government, through its massive military aid in the past, and as we sit right here now, it is like throwing gasoline on a raging fire. Meanwhile, increasing numbers of people around the world are calling for a ceasefire. Unfortunately, as Professor Richard Falk noted, he is an international law professor. By failing to advocate for a ceasefire, Western states have given a green light to Israel's agenda of collective punishment. Again, it's the rich and powerful perpetuating what I consider war crimes that are disproportionate towards a defenseless population with no place to go. Let me say here that the Palestinians, their representatives, such as the Palestine Liberation Organization, Hamas, and others have made mistakes that have cost them dearly. What people or states with power, or even lacking power, make mistakes? Let us begin by taking a look at the U.S. and reflecting upon our history. I won't do that here, I promise. Silence, complicity, and what would I do if I was a Palestinian in Gaza, and hope. As Dr. Martin Luther King reminded us in what I call the human rights struggles of the 1950s and 60s, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We collectively come a long way on many issues of justice, yet have a long road to go. In the decades of long conflict between Palestine and Israel, there are many Jews today who watch the horrors of the current situation. They experience trauma, ambivalence, acculturation, pressure to conform, and therefore to remain silent. Constantly, I've heard not only the demand for justice for Jews, but the refrain of tikkun olam, repairing and healing the world. This is a blessing. I have long believed that silence equals complicity. I see that silence many times in myself. However, I realize how I have avoided discussions recently with a few close Zionist relatives and friends who are avidly pro-Israel. Due to my fears of loss, of painful relationships, my not speaking feels like a form of complicity. It's a contradiction that both I strive to go beyond and one I might not at all either. So how hard should I be on myself? Many of my friends have said, don't be hard on yourself. The really important question is, how critical shall I be of others? Let me point out that as a male of European descent, I have the privilege to speak up, while Muslims, the indigenous folks, people of color, LGBTQ people face consequences and real-life threats right here in this country that I never faced to this day. Despite my own clarity on the issue of Palestine and Israel, there is another issue I'm grappling with. I'm disturbed and struggling with my lack of compassion for Israeli civilians who were wounded, died, or taken hostage beginning on October 7th. That's a really hard one for me, but I'm being really truthful with all of you how I feel. There's a continuing question that signifies a conflict that I've had for some time about violence and nonviolence in the context of liberation struggles against the hegemony of powerful nation states. Again, what would I do if I lived in Gaza now, which is being bombed nightly, and the land invasion probably is taking place right now? I haven't read the news this morning. What would I do? What would you do? My community, in my moments of silence and through prayer, please give these questions some thought, and do share with me. I need guidance. In life, there is struggle, continued struggle, and a questioning of oneself. So let's talk about hope for a moment. I previously spoke about the young people and more Jews stepping forward in this country. In this country, actions are being taken for justice, particularly by young people. They are, I believe, our future and hope. I spoke to this in a meditation a number of months ago. From my experiences in working, building relationships, and community with a diverse group of younger folks. There are many groups out there, Jewish, Palestinian, multi-ethnic, faith-based, and secular, struggling for justice across the wide spectrum. However, a few, such as If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace, have stood firmly against Israeli policies of occupation, collective punishment, and displacement, and demanded an end to the war on Gaza and a ceasefire, and for a just solution that allows both people to live side by side in equality. And I think it's really about equality, not only peace, it's about equality. Equality is imperative. These groups are mostly made up of Jews and non-Jewish allies. I want to share with you another moment of hope in the midst of sadness, and I'll show you a picture of this later. On Friday night, I was in Modesto with a good friend at a candlelight vigil for the victims in Gaza. It was poignant and mostly young people. All I noticed was like 3 of us who were over 50. And it was very diverse and included quite a few young Palestinians. I didn't know that Palestinians lived in Stanislaus County, so it was a pleasant surprise. Their silence and prayerful moments, cries for those in Gaza, hoping their voices would somehow be heard, were so heartfelt. It took me some time to reflect that out of tragedy, there can be moments that enrich us and carry us forward. Again, what a ray of hope that was, and a blessing. In closing, I finally have a few suggestions for you, my friends. Question me, challenge me, other side of the story which isn't often told in the mainstream media, and the actual conditions on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank. Yes, the New York Times, CNN, and Washington Post are biased. A few voices with different perspectives from time to time come through these and other mainstream outlets. I suggest an online search of the following people: Mustafa Barghouti, Gabor Mate, Hanan Ashrawi, Norman Finkelstein, Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb, Rashid Khalid, Mohammed Darwish, Nora Erekat. There are many others I don't know of. My goal in the near future, because I don't believe what I'm seeing and reading in the mainstream press or hearing on television about Gaza, and the fact that the tragedy will probably not end there soon, is to provide you a resource sheet. I will do that in the next few days. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, beloved community.